Yeah, so I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Molecule and Bio. Absolutely delighted to have heavyweights from industry and friends, right, come and join us today just to basically talk through a couple traditional industry insights. So what they expect of the future, what innovations effectively excite them. I'd say like some further reflections on how an ecosystem like DeSci can also sort of like either partner and develop itself in parallel with the elements of traditional industry, and then just a few pearls of wisdom. And seeing that we're in the Museum of the Future, I want them to prophesize a couple innovations and the ways that things might effectively change. But I'd love to invite up the panelists. Thank you. So we have Ed Kapoulas from Sofinnova Partners, just sit to my left here. So Michael Schelper from Care Syntax and Siemens, Christian Marian from Roivant, and Sunil Pai from First Spark Ventures. Alrighty. Well, look, thank you for joining us today. I think there's a lot to cover and not enough time. But the first thing I'm going to do is I won't do you the injustice of introducing you all and sort of like butchering your career history and effectively the mandates that you act under. But maybe just like moving in across the panel, just Ed, just a brief introduction as to what you do and very much what you're focused on.
Sure. First of all, the observation that was just made before this, how sad is it that we as VCs sitting here are now the establishment all wearing jackets and all of you are wearing the t-shirt. We used to be the renegades and now we are supposedly the incumbents. That's a bit disconcerting. Sofinnova, for those of you who don't know us, we are probably one of the most established firms in life sciences, founded in 1972 with the oldest life sciences venture firm around. We have in our history companies like Biogen, Genentech, Actelion, Shockwave. And so with that accrued knowledge and the understanding of access and the understanding of life sciences, we launched a new strategy investing in the convergence of AI and bio, which is one that I lead, digital medicine. And that's why I'm here. I'm here because we're embracing the future. We're looking at opportunities where bio and health are transforming the future, and we're looking to mobilize all the knowledge we've accrued and the 5 billion under management we have today to shape that future with all of you.
Much appreciated. How to follow on that one. Hi, I'm Mick, healthcare technology, 20 plus years operating, investing, currently focusing on one vertical specifically, which is surgery, because it's so, how can we say it, ripe for disruption. And there are many, many aspects that are coming in. Also on the genetic side, how can you make it more personalized, the outcomes improved, and really look into the area that is, after biopharma, the second largest profit pool in healthcare, which is surgery. So on the family office side, we're investing more into late-stage pre-IPO companies along the health tech continuum, typically B2B play. And then on the portfolio side, where I'm currently on the operating aspect, that is literally where we're getting into the dirty operating room, which sometimes is super clean and sometimes a little bit scary, given that it's the second most dangerous place on Earth after the battlefield.
And hi everyone, my name is Christian Marian, and I took out my jacket before this panel on purpose, aware of the audience. But yes, so I'm an early joiner at Roivant Sciences. When I joined, it was a very small startup. It became kind of a large biotech organization. We've done kind of 5 IPOs, over $10 billion in transactions, mostly with kind of leading pharmaceutical companies. And my role was first heading up the business operations, so setting up the operation of the company, and then like more on the M&A and corporate development side. And I think for those of you who don't know Roivant, I think we are among the originators of DeSci.
Yes, a question
I call it more like decentralized pharma, but I think like the real innovation of the company was not a scientific innovation. Was a business model innovation, was this idea that we would change the structure of big pharma, which are those like large central command and control organizations where you have a CEO kind of steering up a huge ship that has implications at each verticals. And instead what we would build is a decentralized pharma model where Roivant is basically sits at the top of a fleet of biotech companies that we seed and nurture. aligning incentives, through the, smaller teams perform better. So aligning the incentives, giving the teams equity in the, company and the program that they are working on. And it turned out to be a quite successful model that has been, been replicated since. Yeah, looking forward to have a discussion of what the next stage of DeSci will look like.
Indeed. Thank you.
Awesome. I think you made the right move. I actually ended up getting out of my Uber and running on the road, and so the lack of jacket would have been helpful. But hi, everyone. I'm Sonal. I work for a fund called First Spark Ventures. We're run in collaboration with the Stanford Research Institute, co-founded by Eric Schmidt. We're a deep tech fund. We do everything pre-seed to Series A in the deep tech realm. We'll take a look at. I look at a lot of our BioX deep tech deals, so similar to what Ed was mentioning. We're really bullish on the space of computationally enabled companies in the next frontier there. And then my previous life, I was at Genentech, so it's always interesting to see the big pharma lens when looking at some of these companies.
Incredible. Maybe just picking up on that in the aspects of digital biology. So there's, I just want to ask a couple of very specific questions of the panelists, and so feel free to intervene if you've got a thought that might be contrary to the matter expressed, where it's to spark a little bit of critical discussion or controversy, or there's a lived experience or just some pearl of wisdom that you would like to bring in there. But just maybe just something on the sort of the digital biology side. You've spoken a lot about next generation health sets and effectively looking, and you've been very vocal about the sort of broader integration of this across the value chain. So one of the things around sort of DeSci is the idea of DAOs, these decentralized autonomous organizations, and the movement of citizen science and bringing people together. And so there is this obvious use case that people are articulating around, moving past the data silos and getting people to want to contribute and move into this. So I'd love to sort of understand, what do you think across the value chain is the low-hanging fruit? What would you like to see change? And what advice would you have for a number of the people that operate the DAOs here and trying to mobilize their communities and sort of actually leverage what data they might have within them?
I think you touched on a really essential point that I think a lot of the struggles we see with our portfolio companies and even the companies we look at is the lack of federated data sets. So we have a lot of large-scale healthcare claims, real-world data, scientific data. It's just not all federated in a view that's really understandable. I think one thing that's been really interesting for me when you speak to lower-hanging fruit, there's a lot of focus right now on computation and discovery and development. There's less so at the latter end of the value chain, and there's really low-hanging fruit for AI to come in and implement. So two areas I'll talk about. One is AI for biomanufacturing. So we're really bullish here about how do you actually use next-gen predictive systems to help scale up traditional GMP manufacturing for monoclonal antibodies, small molecules, even simple known modalities like that. There's a lot of data rich there that's not currently being tapped into. The second area we're really bullish on is the use of AI for pharma commercialization. So when we think through actually launching a product, understanding different access value chains, pricing, helping a business development team understand the molecules they're bringing in-house and diligencing that more properly. So to answer your question overall, I think it is a huge struggle. I think there are lower hanging fruits at the latter end of the value chain that I think folks are not currently looking at. They're really focused on discovery and development. So we're really keen to find companies that are working around newer spaces that perhaps aren't as much in the press as some of the bigger isomorphic type of deals.
Well, it would be extraordinarily intriguing to see the traditional distribution model of pharma and the heavy reliance of sort of M&A in the R&D cycle sort of change a little bit, which will probably lead to one of the last questions I'll ask. Christian, you're talking about decentralization. You mentioned it. I need to ask about it now. Yeah, could you explain a little bit about what was the magical insight with Roivant, the Vants, the way they worked? Also what the company noticed about the pharma operating model that allowed Roivant to have all this success stepping in. Why is it different to Lilly or Sanofi or a variety of other companies?
Well, Lilly is a much bigger company than us. So it would be a little bit, arrogant of me to claim that we're doing a better work than them. But certainly we I think our model is very complementary to kind of the standard bigger pharma area. And I think what we've noticed is that big pharmas, just like most industries, are moving very often in groups towards the similar directions, and they tend to there is an exciting space. Let's pick obesity, right, where Lilly is now very strong, and you see every pharma kind of prioritizing that space and kind of leaving aside tons of promising science for no reasons, no safety or efficacy reasons, but really purely strategic reasons. And we saw that over and over again, like big pharma kind of dropping the ball on great projects, and we thought there might be kind of a different, better model to maximize value across those assets. And the way we do this is that we identify those promising assets, in license them, so transact with the pharma partners, and we really build companies around those. So and that brings a couple of advantages. One, in general, smaller teams perform better. That's for science and for across industries. Two, instead of for our leadership to be kind of therapeutic area head in a big pharma, that person become a C leader right in that organization and has also kind of shared incentives in that program. Because think about it, if you're a drug developer at Lilly or Roche, right, and you work on a program, your incentives are actually not really aligned, because if your program succeeds, it's a drop of water in that massive organization. Your stock will not go unless it's a GLP-1, right? Like 2, 3, 4, 10x, right? But if the program fails, the companies go through all type of reorganizations. Your team might be discarded and so forth. So you don't really have an incentive to go as fast and as cheap as possible, basically. And that's what we changed with that model, where we allow them to be really entrepreneurs as opposed to corporate soldiers. And the last point I would say is that that model also allowed our investors to basically invest in projects and companies that they were really excited about. So if they're excited about immunology, they could invest in Immunovant, for example, as opposed to the top co that has a kind of a broad portfolio of assets. So this is really kind of what we brought, I would say, as kind of an innovative business model. And I think there is a lot more to do, and I'm excited to see to have this conversation around this side, because I think if you can, what we've done is align incentives of executives and leaders and to some extent shareholders. But I think if you can bring on top, the patient community, the scientists working on those programs, it can become a very powerful tool. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I see the analogies with some of the aspects of DeSci, and also some of the things Paul talks about in terms of, some of the ideas articulated by Andrew Lowe, who was, obviously
early advisor to Roivant.
Yeah, early advisor to Roivant,
Board member.
and BridgeBio, et cetera, minimum viable teams, allowing scientists to really be within their zone of hyper speciality and focus, et cetera. So, I mean, it's there's some intriguing analogies to effectively draw a mix. I wanted to ask you more on this sort of sort of delivery workflow side of things, because just in relation to care syntax, you guys provide sort of you optimize certain types of surgical technologies and what's effectively happening within the hospital setting. But all of those unacquainted, what would a patient journey look like in that setting, and where could things move into the future? Would we see a prospective decentralization of some of these surgical technologies? So I can get it at a GP practice or roll into my home and get minor nip tuck touch-ups, etc. So I'm wondering how diffuse the technology can get.
I like the use cases that you have for the home circle. It's okay, not judging. Look, if a lot of you maybe traveled even via plane to Dubai, right? And we don't necessarily have a concern when we board the airplane that we will not arrive at our destination. When it comes to getting into an operating room, most likely we feel a little bit different about that. Yes, naturally, the person that has to go into an operating room has a different risk profile. There's a need for medical intervention. But at the same time, there's no system integrated approach, right? Even if you were to look at aviation and what is really the work that a pilot does, often still utilized at takeoff and landing, or if there's anything that happens, but fully supported and augmented by the technology that works in Unity, in the plane, around the plane, on Earth, as well as in space. And then we are going into the operating room where we are facing so many different silos. And a little bit back to Sonal's point from the beginning, right? We do not have a federated data model or access to that. And the same thing comes to surgery, where you do not have a structured and curated data flow because of all of these data silos. So you're having extremely skilled people there that are operating, I wouldn't say blindfolded, but definitely with the tunnel vision. And they do not have a holistic view over what is actually happening with the patient before, during, as well as after the surgery. Because in a lot of instances, you have to connect the data points before, do the risk stratification, or really understand, should that patient actually undergo surgery or not, which currently you can't, right? And well, you could with a lot of manual labor or with technology such as the one that we are currently putting into the market. And bringing all of that together by eliminating these silos, having a structured and clinically curated data flow, you basically have the foundational model for surgery, which is not only important for the provision side that you alluded to, but it's also very important for clinical trials. It's important for showing efficacy, efficiency, so post-market surveillance for medical devices, and many other aspects. And if we take some of the medtech companies, not putting names out there, but there was recently one that put a surgical robot into practice. Took only 15 years to get it FDA cleared. So the moment it's launched, it's outdated day one. So with exactly this real-world data and real-world evidence, we can bring that down from 15 years to less than a year. And why is that important? We know that the knowledge in the medical field doubles, every 73 days, right? So when it comes to medical devices, we have to get them quicker into practice to generate more insights. Think about the anti-genomic space where we are at the infant stages. Why? Because, again, there's a lot of resistance, we have mindsets that need to change, and. So looking at a patient's journey, ideally, one day I would feel as comfortable getting into an operating room as boarding an airplane. That might still be a little bit further out, but the more we can connect the dots, the more we can use personal information, be it genetic information, be it connecting prems with what would be relevant on the pharma side, the more we can improve the outcomes. Right now, the biggest problem we have is incentives are massively misaligned. So talk about a total knee arthroplasty, whether the patient can walk the next day or can never walk again. The reimbursement is the same, and I think that is a problem.
Yeah, intriguing. Ed, so tell us a little bit about digital medicine. It's the strategy that you effectively run at Sofinnova. You've also rode a wave of like some shift in modalities, referencing sort of Achilles in a video game that was approved by the FDA for ADHD treatment. So like, I'd love to see how you envisage the build out of digital medicine. Talk us a little bit through the technology stack, the opportunities that are effectively, that are present today and we might see in the future.
I don't know if we have enough time for that, but I'll give it my best. What is very interesting, what you said, Christian, is actually, I would argue that the OGs of DeSci are probably the VCs, the life sciences VCs. Because in a cynical way, you could describe life science VC as off-balance sheet R&D, right? It's basically the ability to take some orphaned piece of IP that somebody believes in, and then it's up to us to fund it. Now, the funny thing is, though, that we still have to sell it to pharma, or at least my biotech colleagues have to. And that's because I think there's three ways of making money in venture. And believe me, this goes to a point that you actually asked. There's three ways of making money in venture. It's sort of like taking existing technologies through new channels, new technologies through existing channels, or new technologies through new channels. Now, existing technologies through new channels, I would argue that's where the tech incumbents have really generated vast returns. Think YouTube, think telehealth. You don't take a technological risk. You just, provide access to a technology in a new way. New technology, existing channel, I would argue, is pharma. It is biopharma in particular. Now, the challenge there is, or the benefit there, is that it's an insulated, captive environment. If there's 100 pharma companies who can transact with 5 business development executives each, then the audience that my colleagues on the therapeutic side have to sell to is 500 people only. That's a very small environment. Now, moreover, half the LPs in our funds are those same pharmaceutical companies. So they actually have access, they have a preferred access to these technologies, get a first row seat, and then get to access them and acquire them. So the benefit of that is that it's a closed environment where, you play inside baseball, everybody knows each other, and it's kind of an elegant sport like fencing, whereas the aforementioned category is much more like a street fight, oftentimes with a rusty knife. Now, what we're thinking about and why I'm here is the third category, new technology, new channel. And the question then is, what does that new channel look like? And what are the conditions that you have to put in place for such a new channel to actually work? There's a couple of things, even if DeSci were to work in, let's say, a future environment where, you know, peer review will be on-chain, IP litigation will be on-chain, everything will be on-chain. There's still a couple of things that you cannot get away from. Those are, at least in my mind, manufacturing, clinical trials, and the biological response rate of any molecule in the body. Those are ultimately the things that are still in the real world. And that's our mission, to basically find that integration, to fund that integration, to find the companies that provide that integration, and ultimately build that new world of a new technology and a new channel.
Thank you for that. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just want to sort of put out one sort of general question to all the panelists here. So seeing where we're sat and situated in the Museum of the Future, and I was asking for a little bit of some prophetic visions from everyone on the panel here. So I'm just going to paint a scenario here. So the year is 2035. We sort of advanced on quite a bit. You've become the all-knowing, all-seeing sort of artificial superintelligence, and you're focusing your lens on the healthcare and scientific research sector. So like, what is it that you would like to see change in that? And maybe just a couple points in terms of list of priorities. So yeah, just I'd love to get a couple perspectives on that. Sonal, would you like to?
Yeah, I can think of many. I think the number one that comes to mind is standards and metrics. I think what we struggle with, especially in this new computational era, is what does good look like? A few companies have started to, like in silico medicine, just produced a really nice result that shows this is what we've achieved. Whether or not we want to set that as the baseline is a different question. But I think at least in 10 years, if we can have standards and metrics that this community is following of this is what good looks like versus this is not, that would be a huge win.
Amazing. A point dear to my heart, at least like on the longevity side, I feel that there is a lack of scientific consensus around like what is a strong outcome, where should the industry effectively be stewarding. But yeah, point for another discussion. Christian?
Yeah, so my kind of optimization dream is a little bit kind of aligned with what you said. It's less on like, obviously we need to optimize kind of the drug discovery piece, but I feel we're already doing a pretty good job with the advance of AI and so on. Like we're pretty good at designing small molecules, even large molecules and so forth. So I feel like the huge challenge for our industry is slightly less the discovery piece, but it's more that the funnel gets really, really small. And I see every single day, like I've been pitched, you know, great kind of science that would deserve to, you know, be advanced, but for reasons that are like capital constraints and, you know, market realities, right? Unfortunately, of kind of how the insurers, right, the payers are reimbursed in that space and so on. Like, you know, those great like kind of scientific programs for patients and for, you know, community at, you know, the world as a whole are not really advancing. So if we can find ways to basically like extend that funnel of drugs that progress from discovery all the way to the clinics to, you know, ultimately commercialization, I think that's really kind of, you know, where my dream would be that in 2035 we would have a better model to bring those.
Maybe just one question around that, and this is probably a point more relevant to the DeSci community because there's a lot of repurposing that happens through DeSci. Like, what's your thoughts there? Are there things that could prospectively enable that? Do you think that there is a significant degree of clinical utility in looking at compounds that may have not been developed for like the right indications, or at least they have sort of more prospective application or use? That's to you.
Yeah. No, I mean, certainly, but I think it solves only one piece of the puzzle, right? I think the advantage of this repurposing is that it's molecules that are relatively known and have been, you know, have gone through kind of the earlier stages of safety trials at least and so forth, right? And that allows certainly an acceleration of understanding how this molecule works in a specific population, right? So that's one step, and it's an important one, and it's certainly the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, that I think the industry should, you know, focus on. But certainly if we can also find ways through DeSci to accelerate, you know, the development of, you know, new compounds as well, because we have strong biological rationale for an infinite amount of compounds. We have, you know, kind of the ability to design those compounds, but we don't have the ability to put them into patient fast, basically.
Appreciate that. Mick, you being the ASI, the future,
No, just building
how's the
on
law
top.
going to play out?
Well, look, building on top of what Christian said, I think one wish that I think will be more possible than ever in 2035, which is not too far away, is to actually have the discovery part. Yes, we have to open up the funnel, right? Enable with DeSci projects to really widen the funnel, but at the same time, we have to really include the entire population on the planet, not have it based upon a very small demographic, which is currently happening with a lot of the projects. And technology, how it advanced already today and how it will continue to advance and evolve, will definitely provide a foundation to do that. And if we were to look at the last 3 industrial revolutions, it was always focused on, let's call it the Western world, so to say, and now we're having the 4th one, which all of a sudden includes the entire world, because there are no geographic boundaries. And that is the same thing that we need also for drug discovery in order to really make sure that we are having 4 different subcontinents, 4 different ethnicities, drugs that really hit home and create the impact, which also would create a shift in terms of currently, where's the largest profit pool in pharma, right? If we look at the profit pool, it's US. That's why over 50% actually is all focused on that. We do see China rising as a superpower in that respect. They can do a lot of things faster, cheaper, quicker, and there's a lot of competition in China. But then again, there will be much more coming to the pipeline. So how can we unlock other geographies and create more of a balance in terms of the volume and the impact, and not necessarily just with a profit pool where we see whatever, 8 out of the top 20 drugs being focused on cancer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because at least in Western territories, they've experienced a little bit more homogeny in terms of the patient populations, and also everyone is treated. And so like it actually affects clinical enrollment rates. So, you know, talk about the rise of China, they can just run trials quicker because people want therapy, right? And they haven't effectively been treated before. But, you know, that's, I guess also the hope of a lot of people in this room is like, what do a lot of these territories fundamentally miss? Like it is a venture capital ecosystem, an ecosystem that allow people to sort of get their ideas spun out and effectively work on it. But yeah, Ed, would love your thoughts on how the future unfolds.
I'll try and keep it short, but I think the goal we're building towards are markets that are n equals 1. So everybody is its own market, which means that probably healthcare and even pharma sales has to become a services model. Now, how would that look? And mind you, there's a couple of shameless portfolio plugs coming. You know, you would have, for example, a company like Bioptimus that we invested in that is building foundation models to capture the first principles of biology. They would be integrated in the AI doctor in my pocket. I would have a problem, I would consult that, they run a bunch of analyses, they're like, this is exactly what you need right now. Then that feeds perhaps into another portfolio company called Leighton Labs that designs a biologic that I then can take that then has the required effect. Or, you know, a chemical that can be provided to me, prescribed to me. And ultimately in that services model, I think you circumvent the geographical challenges that you mentioned. You circumvent some of the challenges around, you know, market sizing in this or that geography. And hopefully the increased understanding of the individual you know, sort of like is the opposite movement right now that we're seeing where indications as we identified them, cardiovascular, metabolic diseases, actually turn out to be interlinked, cardiometabolic. So these are artificial constructs that we provided to make, you know, sense of the world for ourselves. That word is reductionism. So I hope that we can circumvent reductionism by embracing the complexity of the whole. And that requires us to basically have an n equals 1 market and a services model for each of ourselves. I don't know if 2035 is too ambitious, but that's the end goal we're working on.
Well, anyway, it was just that with everyone in the media talking about things being so imminently around the corner in terms of technological change, like, you know, like why not stretch it out so a bit? But I would love to thank you all for your time today, sort of sharing the sort of insights and pearls of wisdom. And yeah, so thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for moderating.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I